Good afternoon, everyone. If I can call this meeting to order, good afternoon, and welcome to this regular hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, September 22nd, 2014. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Council Members Mike Bonin, Mitchell Englander, and Bob Blumenfield, and we are ready to begin. Members, this is, I hope, will be a relatively painless meeting. I'd like to offer items 2, 3, and 4 as potential consent candidates.
Second.
And seeing no objection, those items are approved. And that brings us to regular agenda item number 1.
Item number 1 is a communications from the Board of Administration of the Los Angeles City Employees Retirement System and the City Administrative Officer relative to a request to increase the retiree maximum medical subsidy for plan year 2015 for Tier 1 discretionary retired members. This is a time limit file with the date of September 28, 2014, as the last day for council action on the last day for council action is September 26, 2014. The Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee waived consideration of the above matter.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Maria Gutierrez with the CAO's office. Also present today are a representative of the LACERS board and staff. Before you is the request to increase the retiree maximum medical subsidy for the plan year 2015 for Tier 1 discretionary retired members. The LACERS board has requested an increase in the retiree maximum medical subsidy of 7.93% for plan year 2015. The Tier 1 discretionary retired members are individuals who retired on or before July 1st of 2011 and did not pay additional contributions to receive vested increases to their maximum subsidy. The recommended increase represents $116.08 on a monthly basis. Annually, this is an estimated $1,392.96 a year per employee. The CAO recommends approval of the 7.93% increase based on the following considerations. The discretionary retired members did not have the opportunity to pay additional retirement contributions in exchange for vested health benefit increases. The proposed increase provides equity with other retired members who did have the opportunity to pay the additional contributions to receive vested increases in their maximum subsidies. Also, more recent retirees are now vested retired members or are capped retired members. Discretionary retired members are a diminishing group as they will age out into Medicare by age 65. The average monthly retirement allowance of these members is approximately $4,300. This is an estimated $51,000 annually. At this time, there are no negative fiscal impacts to the general fund as the proposed increase is less than the 8% actuarial medical trend rate that was assumed in the LACERS valuation. So while there is no negative fiscal impact, this is more of an issue of savings. Adopting a lower amount naturally would generate larger savings. The fiscal impact would be ongoing for 15 years under the current LACERS funding policy for experience gains. First-year savings to the city contribution for the general fund only are estimated at $7,649 under the 7.93% scenario. Including proprietary departments and both systems, the savings would be approximately $9,443. These savings are expected to increase every year over the remaining 14 years, along with the assumed actuarial payroll growth of 4.25%. We're available to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, a couple of questions, and I'm trying to figure this out, and I know it's been a pattern and practice in the past to do this, but I don't quite understand it. And I also don't understand the negative fiscal impact statement, because I understand we made an assumption of 8%, but that's just an assumption. It's real money either way. This is money coming out of the general fund. whether or not it was above or below our assumption, the amount of money coming out of our general fund is the same. Is that correct?
Actuarially, we refer to it in terms of savings. So what we're looking at is the delta between what the status quo is and what the increase is going to be. So in the valuation, we do make some assumptions. So if we don't do this, would there be additional savings? Yes, there would be.
I guess in my mind, I don't really, just the way I think about budgets, I don't really draw that distinction quite so brightly in terms of, but I understand that actuarially and how we're doing it, so more of a semantic issue. And I'm not opposed to this, but I'm just really trying to understand it. When we talk about it as an equity issue, I kind of looked at it in the reverse situation. Here it seems like there's a little bit of an inequity because you've got, if we do this, you've got folks who paid, now granted they had the choice, they paid and they got this benefit. And then you have a group of folks who didn't pay into the system early on. They didn't have that choice, and now we're going to grant them this benefit. So we're advantaging them above, we're not equalizing them, we're advantaging them, it seems like. So it was described as equity, creating an equity, and in at least the way I'm looking at it, not that it's necessarily the wrong thing to do, but it is advantaging a group of people, didn't have the opportunity to pay in to do it, but other people, their peers, did pay in or chose to pay in or chose not to pay in. They spent that money, whereas this class of folks kept that money in their pocket, didn't invest it in health care at the end of the day, and are now asking us, or we're asking to spend our general fund money on raising them up to the same level as these other folks. Am I understanding it correctly, or am I missing something?
I could speak for the department, or our general manager is here who could directly address that issue.
So Tom Mattis, General Manager of Lacers. Basically, as you indicated, these individuals didn't have the opportunity to contribute, and the individuals that did contribute actually have a different bar for their raises in the retiree medical rate. They're guaranteed no less than the Kaiser two-party rate ongoing. This is a one-year issue that occurred due to a relatively bad year that we had in our renewals 3 years ago. And so it's really a one-time issue for these members. Of the members that were, the bargaining units representing the members that were asked to contribute post-2011, 98.7% of the members represented by bargaining units did contribute. So the vast majority of employees are contributing today. These individuals unfortunately didn't have that opportunity to contribute. The vast majority clearly would have had they had the opportunity, but this is really a one-year issue that we're trying to help resolve. It's not an ongoing issue. As the CAO indicated, this will age out in a few years.
It'll age out because presumably at 65 they get Medicare. So these are folks who are younger than 65, many of whom may be working out in the world and have health care through another thing. Many of them may not. But that's not necessarily what we need to think about there. But these are folks who are between the age of 55
and 65 largely, and at 65 most of them will age out of this issue unless they have a dependent under age 65 at some point.
And these are folks who didn't have the opportunity to invest. If they had invested, how much would they have paid in to the system?
It depends, because a member can actually make just one payroll contribution toward their retiree health care and then retire, and they have vested a lifetime maximum benefit.
Say that again?
A member could theoretically, in 2011 when the contribution started taking place, theoretically could have made one payroll contribution as an active employee and then retired and have vested that benefit that 4% represented. So it's hard to say how many contributions an individual makes. It could be anywhere from 1 up to a 30-year career of contributions.
That seems really unfair. So the guy who spent 30 years making the contribution, and then at the end, and then someone else gets the very same benefit by making one contribution.
Under contract law, that's the way it does work.
I may have some other questions, but I'll return the floor to the chair for the moment.
floor's yours.
I don't know. I mean,
yield my time.
I mean,
I'll ask a question if I'll give you.
no, but I mean, the thing is, I'm having a little trouble with this one. I don't want to be the Scrooge on this, and it seems like it's been our pattern and practice. So I want to vote yes on this. It does seem like a principle that I don't know that we want to necessarily support. In terms of, and I understand it's a diminishing group, and there's reasons in that sense to do it. I just, we're taking money out of the pocket of current services, out of current employees, out of our system, out of our general fund, and we're putting it in the pocket of retirees who didn't have a choice but never made the investment to have this extra benefit. Whereas when other people were faced with that choice, they either made the investment or they didn't make the investment and they got the benefit. These folks never made the investment. They were able to pocket that money. If you compare the 30-year employee, I guess, who made the investment versus the 30-year employee who didn't make the investment, you've got an employee who didn't make an investment for 30 years. But now you're also telling me it's more complicated because you got a lot of employees who may have just made one contribution at the end, so maybe that inequity is not as bad. When I think about the 30-year employee versus the 30-year employee, I want to vote no because of that situation. When I think about just the last-minute employees who all got away with this benefit, so to speak, got away is the wrong word, who received this benefit, then I'm more inclined to vote yes. But that's what I'm struggling with.
Hi, I'm Lita Payne, Assistant General Manager at Lacers. So, just to add some more information to this, the subsidy, the health subsidy for these under 65 folks is one piece of the big subsidy puzzle. So we pay a number of subsidies as the over 65 population as well. And the majority of our members are over 65, so they get a much lesser benefit because Medicare kicks in and pays for quite a bit of that. When we look at the 7.93 versus our 8% actuarial trend rate, it's a little difference. Our overall program increased by 4.8%, which is also going to bring an actuarial gain to the plan sponsor next year. It's mentioned in our actuarial valuation that it's likely that it will lower the costs in the valuation. And of course, that's going to come out in a couple of months.
Say that again, but that goes to Lacers.
It goes, yeah. No,
Right.
it goes towards the plan sponsor's contribution. Because when we're asking for money, and you're right, I mean, we're talking about degrees of savings, and there is money on the table, but you won't write that check, that exact difference. It gets figured into the valuation and costed out, as Maria pointed out, over 15 years. But within that same year that the valuation is figured, we have this 4.8% increase overall, which is adding to the actuarial gain for the plan sponsor for the same year that we're talking about.
We have 4.8 increase.
In our overall program, yeah. The Kaiser increase is one piece of our overall program.
Right, but all those other increases are there's other related subsidies for those potentially.
Right, yeah. For this report, they're only taking into account the one subsidy. Yeah.
Right, I guess, but that's all we can look at
right.
in front of us.
And so that little tiny decrease in the plan sponsor's contribution, that'll get rolled into our big actuarial evaluation that'll be completed in a couple of months, along with our favorable plan year experience of 4.8%.
But that's looking at it in the short box, and then we got to look at the long box, because just even if we have some nice increases this year, we'll have some decreases next. I mean, it's going to ebb and flow, right? I mean, so it's not.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't want to get caught up in looking at the 1 or 2 year because.
Right. And unfortunately,
we know what happened the last 5 years.
The way the administrative code is written, it's a 3-year rolling cap. If you were to look at it over 4, 5, 6, 10 years, we wouldn't have this anomaly. But because it's such a short, if you will, smoothing period, any 1-year spike is going to potentially cause the 3-year cap to be exceeded.
That's an interesting issue. Mr. Chair?
Go back to the smoothing period again that you just talked about, because what is it now?
Lita, do you want to talk about the caps?
Yeah, so the administrative code provisions that govern this subsidy creates a cap for our board members to work within. And basically, it's the increase to the current plan year and the previous 2 years, and that's 3 years total, compared to the 3-year of our actuarial medical trend rate, right? So the same period, comparing. And it's on page 3 of the actuarial report. It shows the comparisons of those rates. Now, if you look at those rates in any other time period, if it was a 2-year smoothing period, a 4-year smoothing period, a 5-year smoothing period, because generally we have very good plan experience, we wouldn't be here today. The board would have been able to work within its cap, and we would have moved on. The 14.9 anomaly year, it just threw us out of whack just looking at 3 years, period. Like I said, even you would think 14.9 in a 2-year period, that would have to affect you. It wouldn't have. I mean, we've looked at it from a variety of perspectives. It was really just a 1-year bad experience year. Our high-cost claims increased 272%, and it's just a bad claim year, you know.
Is it typical to have such a short smoothing period for purposes of determining?
I haven't seen this type of smoothing period in determining health subsidy increases. You know, the City of Los Angeles pre-funds its health care, which is very unusual out in the environment. So our practice here, frankly, I think it's a good one. You know, let's try to stay below the medical trend rate. You know, it's a good practice. Pre-funding is a good practice, but because we're one of only a very few that pre-funds, we don't see these types of things in other systems.
It is certainly shorter than any smoothing period we use from an actuarial perspective.
Yes.
So is there another way to handle this instead of just having the general fund subsidize this, to change the smoothing period or somehow get it back into the system instead of being an additional subsidy from the general fund?
Well, it is going to be coming from LACER's funds. We're paying it out of our funds. It would be amortized over a long period of time. The delta is...
But
Not really.
in the end, the general fund and respective proprietary departments will pay for whatever the bill is going to be. And we pay for this annually through the city contribution.
Right, so once we make this contribution,
So-
even if things smooth out, we never get our money back. LACER's will...
Once we make the contribution, basically the money stays within the fund.
And the contributions come from 3 places. Certainly the city makes its contribution. The city employees pay at a rate of 11% for their contribution. 70% of the money that we have over any 10-year period to pay benefits comes from our investment return. So yes, the city makes a contribution, but that gets amplified by our investment return.
Is there any way that we can do this, we can authorize this to happen, but to happen not from the general fund, to happen from your investments, or because, as you say, over time it's going to get smoothed out, but...
So even though if the system should have a positive investment year, that basically has an impact on the contribution in a positive way, because it means that the city will likely, although there's many elements to the contribution rate, the city will likely be paying less. In a bad year, the city has to pay more. But at the end of the day, whether it comes from the investments, at the end of the day, the general fund makes the system whole, and every year we issue the TRAN, and the proprietary departments pay their respective share. I'm not sure how we would bifurcate something like that, since the city basically pays the contribution. A large part is coming from the general fund. A smaller piece comes from airports, harbor, and now the 2 systems themselves for their respective employees. There are other options that council could consider. As mentioned in the department's letter and board reports, there was some talk about a lower percent, a 3.5%, that the impact to members, that's just a $51 increase. The 793% is a $116 increase. It was our opinion that at the end of the year, at the end of the day, when we evaluate all other impacts that are going to happen in the valuation, the impact and the savings are ultimately nominal. But I understand your concern about the general fund. One thing also to point out is what triggered the council review this time around was exceeding this 3-year average. Next year, if there is no exceeding of the 3-year average, then this will likely not, it does not come for council for review, and the board has the discretion to act.
When you say it's nominal and related to that, I calculated it out to be about $2 million a year.
Okay, what?
So, and it would be, as I understand it, it's $2 million we're putting in this year, but would be $2 million going forward ad infinitum. We wouldn't necessarily have the additional time that they need the increase next year, but we're still going to pay $10 million over the next 5 years, which maybe is nominal in some sense, but when you compare to the choices that we've been making in this budget, not necessarily so nominal.
Right. When you multiply the impact, the increase by the estimated 1,500 members that it could impact, is how we can derive the $2 million. In our report, we looked at it in terms of the contribution rate. What is the impact on the contribution rate? Because there is a 15-year amortization period. So in our report, we reported that the impact to the general fund in 1 year was $7,600. That's how we get to $7,649 for the general fund.
Explain that to me, because maybe I was just doing it on the back of an envelope kind of thing, assuming $2 million.
So based on the impact to the contribution rate of 0.0005%, it would basically reduce our payment to the system by approximately $7,649. Under the 3.5% scenario, the savings are naturally larger, and the savings there would be $748,000.
Still, I'm not quite getting, how do you get to that lower? I was just taking the number, the subsidy number, multiplying it by 1,500 and getting $2,088,000.
It is, because we're dealing with the contribution rate, which is driven by the valuation, it is a percentage that is provided by the actuary. So it's an actuarial rate, and that's where we get the impact.
Because, like I said, we pre-fund the health benefits, so it's never a dollar to dollar. You know, we spend $100 million on this program every year. The city does not write a $100 million check every year to LACERS. It's all valued in our annual evaluation and then built into the contribution rate. So this is a savings actually to the contribution rate. It will be thrown in with all the other factors like our investment return.
I see what you're saying, because we're already paying this because we've already factored that in. And
Yes.
in my mind, that's where we started this, which is I usually don't think that way, because we make the assumption of what we're going to pay, but that's kind of arbitrary in the sense that that's how we set it at that amount. That doesn't mean that that's money in the bank. It's still $2 million of real money. It's not 7,600 or 7,100, whatever you said. That's the delta between what we assumed and what this would be. But our decision today affects $2 million of general fund money. Is that correct?
The subsidies paid from LACERS funds directly, not from the general.
No, it's the general fund, right? I mean, I'm sorry to I don't.
No, I know
it's this whole time giving me a lesson on this.
No, I'm with you now.
Because I'm trying to limit myself, and I don't, and I apologize. No. But it is the general fund. I mean, it's the LACERS fund. It's the amount that we put in. But at the end of the day, our decision point of we vote yes or we vote no is a $2 million delta to the general fund. Whether you call it a savings or an increase,
or however long it's amortized out over.
Yeah, or whatever it is, it's $2 million that we would have in our general fund if we vote no, and it's $2 million we won't have in our general fund if we vote yes, of which we could spend on police, firefighters, sanitation, current employees, retirees, or anything else we want to spend it on. It is actually $2 million, unless I'm wrong, but that's what I'm trying to understand. And again, even $2 million is not, in the scheme of things, is not a big number, but I'm just partly trying, and I apologize, I'm learning this as we go. So maybe I didn't do my homework enough, but was it? It was twice as much, 4 times as much as $500,000. There's a lot of ways you could break this up. It's less than $5 million.
Mr. Bonnet.
I am thoroughly confused now. This conversation has been about as clear to me as the lyrics to I Am the Walrus. I'm still not clear on Mr. Blumenfield's question. Is this $2 million that could otherwise be used in the general fund or not? This question seems to defy a yes or no answer.
I think when we look at LACER's costs, we look at it in terms of the contribution because that's the check the city cuts each year to LACER's. So our fiscal impact statement addresses that aspect. If you just look at the increase to one member today and what that means, yes, there is an increase of approximately $1,300 in 1 year. If you multiply that by 1,500 people, you get $2 million. Lee is our actuarial expert, and I think he can explain things.
I'm not sure I want an actuarial. In fact, I know I don't want an actuarial answer.
But he's not an actuary.
Let me try to ask this a different way. Mr. Blumenfield has suggested, and so I've asked, is this money that would otherwise be in the general fund? And then I'm hearing the complicated answers. Tell me if this is correct, is that we've already given LACER's the money, and they don't need all of the money that we've given them immediately, so the money that is sort of left over between what they need and what we've given them could be used for this. Is that roughly simplistically correct?
So we're talking about the contribution for the coming fiscal year. So you have not given us anything yet. So we're talking about a potential difference in city savings.
They assume we're going to give them. That's the better way.
So if a few months from now, I'm trying to work with some of my colleagues to find money to open the emergency winter shelter programs early, and someone says we don't have the $800,000 for that, it could be argued that this $2 million here could have funded that. Or part of the augmented ambulance plan that we don't have a full year's funding for the fire department.
So there will be savings, like I mentioned earlier. So if the council approves a 7.93% increase, you have savings, but very small savings. And annually, it's only like 7,000 to 8,000. 8,000. It's not 8,000 million. It's 8,000. Very small amount. Small savings. Yes, you can use that. But if the city council approves a smaller increase instead of 7.93% increase, if you approve a 3.5% increase, that savings $7,000 will become a larger number. But that larger number is still pretty small. It's like 0.9 million, because I heard earlier about mentioned 2 million. My calculation is around 0.9 million. So yes, you're going to have a bigger savings. So city contribution would have been $0.9 million less. Yes, you can use that difference for your program, but we're talking about a very small amount of money here.
That's a relative term. In the grand scheme of the amount of the city budget, it's a small amount in terms of funding that might make a difference for a project in someone's district. It's more than enough to do it in many cases. So are you saying that there would be $2 million more available in the general fund only if we were making a decision now that we weren't going to be giving LACER's as much money next year as they're anticipating we'll give them.
Yes, if you make a decision instead of like our recommendation, CAO's recommendation, of 7.93% increase, instead you approve a smaller increase, you're going to have a smaller contribution, and that's the city's savings.
But my CAO caveat,
You'll have a bigger savings.
this is just one of different elements that will impact the contribution rate. Within a month or two, we will be getting the latest valuation. The department is also in the process of conducting an experience study where they will look at changing demographics and economic factors that will drive the data.
Right, but all of those things are going to be true
Different things.
regardless of what we do today, so they're irrelevant to this decision point, right?
I guess I'm saying that the guarantee, whether you're personally, I could not guarantee that your $2 million will be there at the end of the day, because after you put all the laundry together, everything gets washed out.
Let me try to see if I understand what you're saying. I'm really trying very hard to simplify this into sort of a layman perspective for myself. You're basically saying, if I'm discussing my household budget, and I say to my husband, we need to save money, stop buying a latte at Starbucks every day. And you're basically saying, well, our utility bill may go up, or our grocery bill may go up, so the amount of money we save on the latte doesn't matter much in the big picture. Is that sort of analogous?
Well, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but it does have an impact at some point. But there are other factors. That's the point.
One thing being what we mentioned earlier, because our overall increase in premium is only 4.9%, and that includes the entire population. Here we're focusing only about 1,500 people. The entire population, we're going to have big savings, 4.9%.
So I want all of you to focus in on this issue before us, because we get that it's a big program with lots of big factors, and that but that is not relevant to our decision-making process. It may impact how important it is in the big scheme of things, but that's not relevant to us saying yes or no. Okay, so, and sorry, but none of us are experts on the things that you're experts in. And so we're trying to focus in on the very direct question of whether or not this is an appropriate approval for us to make. And I think your metaphor with the latte is exactly right in terms of eliminating consideration of all of the other actuarial factors. We're only considering one actuarial question today. We're not going to consider any of the others. So please try to focus in on that, because I think that the more we're talking about this and all the other things that we should be thinking about that have nothing to do with this particular decision, it's making us more confused than we started. So let's go back. Are you done for now?
No, the fact that more confused than we started is absolutely factually
so
correct.
We're developing consensus on that point. Mr. Blumenfield.
No, just to put. And the question isn't whether we can afford the latte or not. The question is sort of whether or not it makes sense to continue to buy the latte when, someone else is. Whether we should continue to buy the latte for, instead of your analogy being that you're buying it for yourself, you're buying it for your friend, and whether we should continue buying it for our friend or whether or not we shouldn't.
I should be clear that the budget problem in my household with caffeine consumption is my caffeine usage and not Sean's. Just should be clear on that.
We've cleared this up. Yeah.
To your question, at 7.93%, there are minimal savings. If the council was to go lower than 7.93%, yes, there are additional savings.
Let me
to
see
be
if I can
had,
start
which is
with
why
some-
our board
some real
focused on the
baby
equity
steps.
issue.
Baby steps here. We're talking about the delta between the 7.93 and the 8.0 assumption. Right? What's the 8.0 assumption based on? Let's start with that.
That's our actuarially assumed medical trend rate.
Okay. So, all right, so take us now to the next step of where the 7.93 derives from.
That was our negotiated premium increase with Kaiser for our under 65 healthcare program with them, the HMO. And they are our lowest cost plan.
Okay.
If I may, my name is Jamie Lee. I'm president of LACER's board. So the city's contribution that's budgeted in the city's budget that is given to LACER's every year takes into account the 8.0% actuarial medical trend rate. So because we're coming in at 7.93, which was a vigorously negotiated rate with Kaiser, which was already the lowest two-party HMO plan that could be provided, that's the reason why it's showing as an actuarial savings. So what's already budgeted would not require any additional contribution for the city above what's already been taken into account.
But what's been taken into account was basically, earlier in the year, we were told this is how much it's going to cost for medical, and so we made it in our budget decisions. We made the decision, okay, we'll put that amount aside. But that's still, if it costs less, we should be getting the savings for that because it's still general fund money. Once we made the assumption that's how much we were going to spend, that didn't mean it's no longer of relevance to the city. It's just as relevant, in my mind, as it is wherever that assumption went. It's still real money. So I get caught up in that issue, and I sort of factor out that assumption out of my mind in terms of, and maybe I shouldn't be, but I've been factoring that out, thinking I have to look at this as this is $2 million of real money. There is a rationale to spend it because these folks, there's been a pattern in practice where we have in the past when expenses have been higher, we've covered it. But there's also the competing factor, which is, in this case, other employees had that choice and either made the choice or didn't make the choice, so we're treating them inequitably, and frankly, we're treating a lot of all the new retirees inequitably, so why are we favoring this particular class of retirees over other retirees and over current employees and over current services? So that's the lens I'm looking at it, but it may not be the right lens. I don't know.
One argument is because they didn't have an opportunity to pay into that, and what we do at Lacers as a fiduciary is to properly administer the benefits of the plan. We don't negotiate, we don't set the terms or the contract between the employees and the employer. Our job is to invest money as diligently as possible, get as high of returns as possible to lower the city's contribution, but then also to administer the set of terms that we're given. So it's not really up to us to determine whether if it's unfair if one person makes one contribution and thus they're vested in their subsidy for the rest of their lives.
Except Lacers is coming to us and asking us for this additional contribution.
And this is based on a historical precedent that we've sort of researched, that the city has always covered the lowest two-party plan for all of its employees, so it would be sort of unprecedented for city council to move forward.
But didn't that kind of get blown up when we created the two tiers and we started asking some people to pay for it and giving folks the choice and all of that? I mean, it may make sense. I mean, again, none of us want to be the Scrooge and say no. But the question is, when did that get blown up? Are we blowing that up right now in this discussion, or is this sort of just a reflection of what's happened over the last couple of years in terms of expectations for retirees and the tension between current and past and all the rest?
And really, it's only coming up because of that 3-year smoothing plan. Normally, the regular increases that are incurred for medical plans or medical coverage plans across the country at this 8% assumed rate is lower. Like Lacers normally has the discretion to be able to absorb any increases in our overall health coverage costs. It's only because of the 3-year smoothing period, that one spike we had 3 years ago is the only reason why we as a board do not have the discretion just this one time around to move forward without council's approval. So next year, for all of the foreseen years, we shouldn't be having this issue. We didn't for many years before this either. It's mostly because of that 14% spike that you see in 2013.
But once we bake this in, we're then paying this additional $2 million for the next foreseeable future. Is that correct or no?
It's sort of understood that healthcare costs do go up on a percentage basis every year, which is why we always try to come in under what the medical actuarial trend rate is. So for instance, this number came in originally higher than 8%. And because of our relationship with Kaiser and the work that staff has done, we were able to bring that number below through negotiation what the trend rate would be, thus turning into a savings for the city.
And as mentioned earlier, this is a population that will largely age out of this issue when they age into Medicare. So we're not going to continue to pay this increased subsidy to this group for forever.
Right, because they're between the ages of 55 and 65. I mean, and it goes
Almost
back
exclusively, yes.
to the bigger issue of how we've been reducing health care benefits for retirees before I got here, so I can blame people who were here before me. But we've been doing that for a couple of years, and this is, in the scheme of it, like if I was choosing which benefits to cut from our retirees, health care for people under 65 is an easier one to cut than some of the other ones that we have cut.
And our retirees have been sharing costs with the fund for many years. I mean, our retirees have had a $20 copay much longer than the active members have had. Because healthcare in retirement is much more expensive, we have had to adjust copays and coinsurance up. One of our big complaints that we had until very recently was when members moved from active to retired status, calling us up, why am I having to pay $20 to see my doctor? I was paying $5 when I was active. And we try to educate them on the differences in cost, but our members have been cost-sharing with the fund for many years now.
One thing I would like to point out, too, is you mentioned that we're asking for an additional increase in the subsidy. Really, we're not. I mean, the amount that was approved is allowed. The administrative code allows the board to approve an increase in the subsidy equivalent to the increase in the Kaiser two-party non-Medicare rate. They did that. It's just a procedural thing that we now have to come to council for approval, but it's not like they're going above and beyond what the administrative code allows. And in terms of costs, I just wanted to point out a couple things. I mean, you're talking about this 1 year, and I understand your point about the $2 million, which is actually $1.6 million. But if you look over the long term, I mean, for the last 10 years, if you look at the actual trend rate, that's 10%. Medical premium rate increases for LACERs over that same period is 4%. So, and for Kaiser alone, it's 6%. So we're far below the medical trend rate. We've been performing very well. On top of that, we do all kinds of negotiations with the carriers to get reduced rates. We look at other sources of income.
Sorry, again, we're going far afield from the issue before us. Whether or not you're doing a good actuarial job in negotiating rates is not what's before us today. I'm sorry, this is a very thoughtful committee, and we're all trying to figure out what it is that you're asking us to do and why. And that's what we need to focus on, not the bigger trends in healthcare costs and things like that. Please. You mentioned that there's just a procedural reason that this is here, otherwise it would be, a LACER's board decision. What is the procedural reason that we have to approve this? Why isn't this just, because I have no interest in meddling in LACER's internal actuarial decisions about how it handles its funds. That is not something that I want us to dive into if we don't have to. So why are we even here? What is the procedural reason that specifically that this requires council approval? By a certain date.
We're above the 3-year cap. The board's recommendation is above the
wait. Start again.
Yeah. So LACER's board recommendation is above the 3-year cap, and so we're required to come to council.
That's contained in the administrative code.
Yeah. Okay. Now, council's
required... Wait.
Yeah.
So what we're doing today is not appropriating funds. We're not doing anything other than letting you exceed the cap.
Right.
Is that the recommendation? The recommendation is to allow you to exceed the cap under your normal actuarial practices under your 3-year spreading.
I wouldn't refer to it as a cap because the board has the authority.
But we've referred to it as a cap multiple times already.
So the board has the discretion to vote to approve an increase in the subsidy by 3.5%. Anything above 3.5% must come to City Council for approval. What we're asking for is a 7.93% increase, which is still below the 8.0 medical trend rate. The reason why we've exceeded the 3-year cap is because the average medical trend rate is set over 3 years. So for instance, if we were to adopt a 5-year smoothing period or a 2-year smoothing period, as the CAO's office was explaining, we wouldn't be here. It's only because 2013 had such an unusual spike that the average for the last 3 years is coming out higher than what LACER's is normally able to approve. So even if we were to adopt any other time period for smoothing, we would just go about our business every year the way we do it. But because of this anomaly, we are asking for a larger percentage increase above what LACER's as a board can approve.
Okay. And so just to take that to the next step, if, for example, the recommendation were to retroactively change the smoothing framework to a 6-year cycle or a 10-year cycle or whatever, then that would not require lacers to come to the council for any additional appropriation toward our contribution, nor any other procedural permission for you to do this. It would simply be the kind of thing that you do in the ordinary course of your actuarial assumptions.
Right. Historically, that has been the case. So long as the increase does not exceed what Lacers is able to approve within our discretion, which it hasn't after analyzing the past several years, it's only because this year happens to have a percentage that requires us to come to City Council.
Okay. But coming to City Council means we are expending additional, well, means that otherwise the savings would have come back to the general fund. Is that?
Technically not if the cost of administering the plan was to match the medical trend rate, which it almost does, but it's just under. So technically it is a savings because it's less than the city has already budgeted.
It's less than we budgeted, but again, it goes back to the issue. If we voted no, we said we don't want to do this.
There would be a greater savings to the city's allocation potentially because there are so many other factors that will come out before the city's contribution is made, but it would result in an increased cost and burden to 1,500 retired employees, and that's why we frame it as an equity issue because these are retired employees, most of them with 25 plus years service to the city who did not have an opportunity to pay additional funds to become vested retired members.
And although this calculation was based on a short smoothing period of 3 years, if we were to vote no, that impact on the city's contribution would obviously be stretched over many years. Right? I mean, actuarially, it wouldn't have a statistically significant impact in year 1 or year 2 or year 3. It would be
an actuarial gain that would be
part of the whole stew that you figure in making the contributions over the course of many, many years.
correct.
Okay. So now, can we come back to the equity question, and I think the fundamental question which is before us, and define for me why that's an important principle for the board to provide this benefit, and I think to Mr. Bloomfield's point earlier, provide a benefit to a class of employees a class of retirees that didn't provide any consideration for that benefit compared to those who did provide bargained consideration for it.
The reason why we think it's an equity question is the opportunity to allocate additional funds to receive that vested benefit. Of the members who are vested who do pay an additional amount, that's 98.7% of employees, and extrapolating from there, we would assume that those members, had they had an opportunity to allocate additional funds, would have done so to receive that vested benefit.
But the funds that they would have how much of the funds that they would have put in would have actually paid for this benefit? Because whether they had the opportunity or not, they didn't actually pay for the benefit.
It went into effect July 1st, 2011, or thereabouts, based on pay periods, so it would depend on how long they had been working before they retired. As Tom pointed out earlier, some members paid a pay period or 2, and then they retired, and they vested the benefit. People retiring today have been paying it for 3 years, and they vest the benefit.
So you couldn't really figure it out on an employee-by-employee basis because it could be dramatically different, but could you at least give a ballpark of the combined impact of that contribution? For example, compared to the classes of retirees that did make it, can you figure out some value for if this class of retirees had been given that opportunity and had taken advantage of it, how much in whole would they be contributing to this?
It would depend on so many factors. I think it would be hard to figure out because it would
base
depend
it
on when they started making the
averaging.
contribution, and that the benefit that they would be receiving, depending on the committee and council's decision, is different than those who were quote-unquote in the vested category, because those in the vested category are always entitled to the Kaiser increase. And so every year, and not on a 3-year rolling basis. So if the Kaiser increase was at 15% for 3 years in a row, and the medical trend rate was much below that, those who were vested, who paid in previously, would be vested at the Kaiser maximum each year. So they're actually getting a greater benefit than is being discussed here today, which is a one-time increase to their benefit. It's not capping, it's not allowing them to have the maximum Kaiser increase every year. So it's a material different benefit, and it would, the period of contribution is unknown.
Just ask one more question. I think Mr. Krikorian asked a question, and I know he asked a question. I think I heard the answer. Let me make sure I understood it. He didn't exactly put it this way, but I think essentially he asked, if we vote no today, do we have $2 million to play with or $1.6 million to play with in the general fund? And the answer I thought I heard was no, because it gets mixed up in this actuarial stew over a period of time. Is that?
I would say if you isolate this decision, that anything less than 7.93% would bring back some savings to the city. There are already savings between the 8% and the 7.93% based on the actuarial assumption, but everything under 7.93%, if the committee and council was to decide 3.5%, which was the discretion that our board had to raise it to without coming across the street, there would be a savings there as well, yes.
Well, I have no idea what that meant. But let me ask that again. If we vote no, do we have additional general fund monies to use, and when?
If you just isolate this decision, yes, you would. Of course, the contribution is made up of many factors ultimately, but based on this one decision, yes, it would move the needle down a little bit on the contribution to LACERS.
But if I may. So, again, you got to remember that we're not the experts on this like you are. So I don't mind if you dumb things down a little bit for me at all, just so I understand. Up to the 3.5, LACERS would have had absolute discretion to do it without approval. Correct. So, and that would result in a lower long-term actuarial cost to the city, a greater savings to the city in its contributions. So the equity component here is to increase that from the 3.5 to the 7.93. So, I mean, theoretically, we could choose any number in between 3.5 and 7.93 and say, we don't think it should be 7.93, it should be 6.17 or whatever. And the lower that number goes, the more the long-term savings would be for the city. But that's not going to be a savings that we realize in the next fiscal year, right?
Correct.
It's going to be a savings over a long period of time. That's going to be mixed in, and it may or may not be even rise to the level of statistical significance given the other things that we're going to be considering for the coming fiscal year.
That's correct.
Okay.
Can I just ask Ms. Kalfayan to answer? The question I asked, and just as Mr. Krikorian restated it, no offense to the LACERS folks, you're more used to talking this stuff to council members. Could you explain the answer to that question?
Okay. What this is let me just summarize a couple of things. The increase in the cost, the LACERS board could approve an increase in the cost up to 3.5%. This is higher than that. That's why they're here. That requires an approval. The additional amount, which is isolated to a certain number of people, is a cost to the retirement system. So I think when you're saying that whether this has an impact on the general fund, it could, but it's just one aspect of the impacts, because eventually the general fund will make the contribution to the retirement fund to make it whole, as we were mentioning before. So this could be one factor that impacts how much that contribution is. It may not be $2 million because there are other factors that go into determining what that contribution is going to be. And because there's an actuarial aspect to this, that $2 million would be spread over a period of time. So, and also this group of people is a diminishing group of people because eventually they're either going to not be in the retirement system or they're going to be in the Medicare system, and there'll be a smaller number of people to deal with eventually.
So just to be very, very clear and concise, a no vote doesn't give us a pot of money to reprogram for this year's budget?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anything else, members, with this? I mean, it's been confusing, but it's also been good for us to go through this process. And I think that in light of, especially as we brought it to closure there, I want to support the Lacers Board in their decision-making, particularly when it comes to providing an equitable framework for our retirees. And given the fact that, you know, this is a spread impact, it really tends to minimize any budgetary impact. So I'm comfortable with the proposal. Took some doing, but I'm comfortable with the proposal. If
yeah, I'm comfortable moving forward on it too. Although I still view it as general fund the way I look at it. I've heard all the actuarial stuff. I still can't help but looking at it as general fund. But I get it, and I get it that it's over time, and I understand we've had this pattern in practice, and I'm okay in moving it forward, and appreciated the discussion on it because it's helped me learn a lot more about this. Learned a lot more about how this process works through the discussion. So I'm going to support the chair in a yes vote with the small caveat of saying I'm still looking at it as general fund.
Well, but we all should, and you're 100% right that everything that happens in Lacers, or any of our retirement systems, when we can realize any savings there, that will result over the long term in a savings to the general fund. It absolutely will. But it's just not measurable on a dollar for dollar basis. So, but you're absolutely right. I expect all of our pension boards to be tight with a buck for the same reason, because it affects our general fund, and to continue to maintain an assumed rate of return, for example, that is consistent with the rest of the country and not yield to political pressures, for example, to reduce that assumed rate of return, just by way of example.
And nothing in this discussion, I think, any of us were trying to imply anything other than that they were doing. This hasn't been an indictment on the Lacers system at all, having this discussion. I think we all take that as a given, and we're proud of what Lacers has been doing. So I want to put that on the table.
Very much so, and the cost efficiencies that have been realized have been terrific and continue to be. But you're right that's you know, wherever there's an opportunity for savings there, that is an opportunity for savings in the general fund.
And I'm in the same place Mr. Blumenfield is. For me, this was a question of what the impact analysis was of a yes and a no, and I understood what the impact was of the yes, the impact on the retirees. That was easy to understand. Trying to figure out what the impact was on the general fund for this year's budget was the struggle. Given that there's no impact that we gain from in the general fund for this year's budget with a no vote, then I'm comfortable going forward.
All right. Thank you. So is there any objection to approving the recommendation? Mr. Ingleter, any objection? All right, then took some doing, but it is the unanimous action of the committee to approve the recommendations. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience with us. I was expecting Mr. Lone. Oh, I'm sorry. So, and that brings us next to general public comment. Is there anybody wishing to offer general public comment to the committee? Seeing no hands and having no cards, general public comment is closed and we are adjourned.